At Christmas dinner, my sister smirked and said, "Mom says I can take your new condo." I sipped my wine and replied, "Great, move in Tuesday." On Tuesday, her smirk vanished forever. The drive to my parents' house in the Austin suburbs on Christmas Eve was a tradition I had grown to dread with every fiber of my being. I am 29 years old, and for the last decade, I have been financially, emotionally, and physically independent. I work as a senior hotel manager at one of the most prestigious luxury properties in the downtown area. My job requires me to be a master of reading the room, de-escalating conflicts, and handling incredibly entitled people who believe the world revolves around their immediate comfort. I spend 50 to 60 hours a week wearing a perfectly tailored suit, maintaining a calm, neutral expression while adults throw temper tantrums over the thread count of their sheets or the temperature of their room service coffee. You would think that dealing with high-maintenance guests all day would drain me, but the truth is, nothing exhausts me quite like walking through the front door of the house I grew up in. The weather that evening was unseasonably warm, a typical Texas winter night, but I still felt a cold knot tightening in my stomach as I pulled my car into the driveway. The house looked exactly the same as it had when I packed my bags and left 10 years ago. The same faded wreaths hung on the windows, and the same artificial tree glowed through the living room glass. Inside that house were my parents, Evelyn and Harrison, and my younger sister, Chelsea. Chelsea is 25 years old, but if you looked at her lifestyle, her emotional maturity, and her complete lack of survival skills, you would guess she was a spoiled teenager on summer vacation. While I had spent my early 20s working double shifts, fighting for promotions, and saving every extra dollar to build my real estate portfolio, Chelsea had spent her time mastering the art of the grift. She had never held a job for more than 3 months. Whenever things got slightly difficult, whenever a manager asked her to show up on time, or whenever a task required actual effort, she would quit, claiming the environment was toxic or bad for her mental health. My parents, of course, swallowed every excuse she handed them. They never pushed her. They never demanded rent. They simply opened their wallets and funded her entire existence. Just last year, Chelsea had decided she was going to become an entrepreneur. She fell for a massive online dropshipping scam, buying thousands of dollars worth of cheap inventory she had absolutely no idea how to sell. Within 6 months, the business folded, leaving a massive pile of debt. Did Chelsea have to get a second job to pay it off? Of course not. My father, Harrison, who is 58 and desperately trying to pad his retirement accounts, quietly paid off the $15,000 credit card balance. He dipped directly into his 401k to save his golden child from facing a single consequence. My mother, Evelyn, who is 55 and treats Chelsea like a fragile glass doll, justified it by saying Chelsea was just finding her path. I knew all of this because my mother could not help but complain to me about how tight money was getting, all while expecting me to offer sympathy. I never offered sympathy. I only offered the truth, which they never wanted to hear. As I sat in my car for a full 5 minutes, staring at the front door, I practiced my fake holiday smile in the rearview mirror. I reminded myself that I only had to endure this for 3 hours. Eat the ham, compliment the pie, give them their gift cards, and leave. I thought this would be just another boring, tense holiday where I played the role of the invisible, responsible daughter. I had absolutely no idea that as I sat there breathing in the cool night air, they had already set a trap for me, plotting to hijack the greatest financial achievement of my life to solve their own self-inflicted problems. I walked into the house carrying a bottle of expensive red wine and a bakery box. The smell of roasted ham and cinnamon immediately hit me, masking the underlying tension that always filled the rooms. Evelyn was fussing over the dining table, adjusting the silverware for the 4th time. Harrison was carving the meat with a very serious expression, and Chelsea was sprawled out on the living room sofa, her face buried in her phone, not even bothering to look up when I said hello. We eventually gathered around the dining table. The first 30 minutes were the standard, superficial family script. We talked about the unseasonable weather, we talked about the neighborhood gossip, and my parents asked a few polite, hollow questions about my job at the hotel. nodding along without actually listening to my answers. Then, the conversation shifted to my newest milestone. Earlier in December, after years of strict budgeting and strategic saving, I had officially closed on my second property. It was a beautiful, fully renovated 2-bedroom condo right in the heart of downtown Austin. It was an investment property meant to generate steady rental income and secure my financial future. I had briefly mentioned closing the deal to my mother over the phone a few weeks prior. I had not bragged about it, just stated it as a matter of fact. I assumed she had barely registered the information. I was incredibly wrong. Halfway through the meal, while I was chewing a piece of dry ham, Chelsea finally put her phone down. She looked across the table at me, and a slow, incredibly self-satisfied smirk spread across her face. It was the kind of smile she used when she knew she had already won a game I did not even know we were playing. "So, Madeline," Chelsea said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Mom and Dad said I can move into your new downtown condo next week. I am so excited. Living in the suburbs is literally killing my vibe, and downtown is exactly where I need to be right now." I stopped chewing. The dining room became dead silent. I did not immediately react. I just looked at her, and then I slowly turned my head to look at my parents. I expected Evelyn to correct her, to laugh it off as a joke, or to scold her for being ridiculous. Instead, Evelyn casually reached for the bowl of green beans, avoiding my eyes. "Well, Madeline," my mother said, using that soft, manipulative tone she always used when she was trying to steamroll me. "You have that extra property now. It is just sitting there empty. And Chelsea really needs a fresh start. It just makes perfect sense for family to help family." My father nodded in agreement, pointing his fork at me. "You are doing very well for yourself, Madeline. You have a great salary. You can afford to let your sister use the space while she gets back on her feet. We already told her she could have it." My brain processed the sheer, unadulterated entitlement of what was happening. They had not asked me. They had not pitched it as a favor. They had held a private meeting, decided my property was now Chelsea's property, and were informing me of this fact at the Christmas dinner table, assuming the social pressure of the holiday would force me to comply. A younger version of me would have exploded. I would have screamed, cried, and begged them to respect me. But I was not that girl anymore. The hotel manager persona took over my brain. Cold, calculating, and completely detached. I swallowed my food. I picked up my wine glass and took a slow, deliberate sip. I let the silence stretch just long enough to make them uncomfortable, keeping my face completely blank. "Oh," I said, my voice light, professional, and entirely devoid of emotion. "Thanks for letting me know in advance. You should move in on Tuesday then." Chelsea's smirk widened into a massive, triumphant grin. "Perfect. I will start packing tonight." My parents visibly relaxed, exhaling in relief. They went back to eating their ham, congratulating themselves on successfully managing the situation. They smiled, thinking they had won, thinking I was still the obedient workhorse who would sacrifice her own resources to make their lives easier. But they forgot one crucial detail. They forgot that I deal with entitled, demanding people for a living, and I know exactly how to handle them. I stayed at the dinner for exactly 45 more minutes. I ate my pie, I handed out the generic gift cards I had bought them, and I said my polite goodbyes. Chelsea was already scrolling through furniture catalogs on her phone, humming happily to herself. Evelyn hugged me at the door, whispering how proud she was that I was being such a good big sister. I did not flinch. I did not argue. I just walked to my car, got in, and locked the doors. The drive back to my own house took 20 minutes. The streets were dark and empty, illuminated only by the occasional string of Christmas lights wrapped around oak trees. The silence inside my car was heavy, but my mind was moving at a terrifying speed. As I drove, I could not help but think back to the year I turned 19. That was the year I had finally had enough of the toxic favoritism and moved out of my parents' house. I remembered the very first apartment I could afford. It was a tiny, poorly insulated studio located next to a noisy highway. The bathroom constantly smelled like damp mildew, and the radiator clanked so loudly in the winter that it sounded like someone was hitting pipes with a hammer. I remembered working the overnight shifts at a budget motel, standing behind a bulletproof glass window from midnight until 8 in the morning, dealing with intoxicated guests and counting the hours until I could sleep. I remembered eating instant ramen noodles for dinner 5 nights a week because every extra penny went toward my community college tuition and my savings account. And while I was doing that, fighting tooth and nail for my survival, what was happening back at my parents' house? Chelsea had dropped out of her first semester of college because the reading assignments gave her anxiety. Did my parents force her to get a job? No. That exact same year, Evelyn and Harrison bought Chelsea a brand new, mid-sized SUV because she complained that taking the bus to the mall was too degrading. They paid her phone bill, they paid for her gym membership she never used, and they filled her closet with designer clothes. I had spent 10 years building myself from the ground up with absolutely zero financial support, while they threw thousands of dollars into a bottomless pit of Chelsea's laziness. But as I gripped the steering wheel, turning onto my street, a deeper, much darker realization hit me. This demand for my condo was not just about giving Chelsea a cool place to live downtown. It was about my parents' own survival. Harrison was only a few years away from retirement, and I knew his financial anxiety was reaching a boiling point. Chelsea was a massive, bleeding wound in their bank accounts. By forcing her into my brand new, mortgage-heavy investment property rent-free, my parents were effectively transferring the financial burden of their golden child onto my shoulders. They were trying to use my hard work as a life raft to save their own sinking retirement plans. It was not just entitled. It was deeply, strategically parasitic. I parked in the driveway of the first house I had ever bought. I sat there in the dark, listening to the engine tick as it cooled down. The ghost of that exhausted, hungry 19-year-old girl sat in the passenger seat beside me, demanding justice. My parents thought I was a pushover. They thought, because I did not scream at the dinner table, I had surrendered. I looked at the digital clock on the dashboard. It was exactly 10 o'clock at night on Christmas Eve. The world was sleeping, but I was wide awake. The game had just begun, and it was my turn to move. I walked into my kitchen, dropped my keys on the counter, and immediately started a pot of extremely strong black coffee. There would be no sleeping tonight. My mind was crystal clear, operating with the kind of hyper-focused efficiency I usually reserved for major hotel crises. I drank a mug of coffee standing over the sink, grabbed my professional digital camera, my laptop, and a tape measure, and headed right back out the door. I drove straight to the downtown area. The city was quiet, a rare moment of stillness for Austin, but the high-rise building where my new condo was located was brightly lit and heavily secured. I nodded to the overnight concierge, badged my way through the double glass doors, and took the elevator up to the 12th floor. When I unlocked the door to my unit and flipped on the lights, a wave of intense pride washed over me. The condo was absolutely stunning. It smelled of fresh paint and ambition. The hardwood floors gleamed under the recessed lighting. The kitchen featured gorgeous quartz countertops and brand new stainless steel appliances that had never been used. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the city's skyline. Every single square foot of this property represented my sacrificed weekends, my missed vacations, and my relentless discipline. It was my empire, and the thought of Chelsea trashing it, leaving clothes all over the floor, and hosting loud parties while I paid the mortgage made my blood run ice cold. I spent the next 2 hours moving methodically through the empty space. I opened all the blinds to let the city lights reflect off the glass. I turned on every single fixture. I took dozens of high-resolution photographs from every possible angle, making sure to highlight the spacious walk-in closets, the double vanity in the master bathroom, and the private balcony. I wanted the photos to look irresistible, the kind of listing that makes people stop scrolling immediately. After I had the perfect shots, I sat cross-legged on the bare living room floor with my laptop. It was nearing midnight. I opened 3 different major rental platforms and began crafting the listing description. I did not just list the square footage and the amenities. I sold a lifestyle. I described the walking distance to premium coffee shops, the proximity to the business district, and the luxury of the building. But more importantly, I emphasized the strict building management. I explicitly wrote out the security features: 24-hour concierge, key fob access required for all elevators, and a zero-tolerance policy for unauthorized guests lingering in the lobby. I set the monthly rent at a highly competitive rate. It was slightly below the market average for a luxury two-bedroom unit in that specific zip code. I did not care about maximizing the profit margin for the first year. I cared about speed. I needed a high-quality tenant, and I needed them immediately. I uploaded the photos, double-checked the spelling, and reviewed the background check requirements. I required a minimum credit score of 750 points, verified proof of income showing at least 3 times the monthly rent, and impeccable references from previous landlords. I hit publish on all 3 platforms. I watched the listings go live, glowing on my computer screen in the dark apartment. I closed my laptop, set my phone notifications to maximum volume so I would not miss a single alert, and lay back on the cold hardwood floor, staring up at the ceiling. I had laid the bait. Now, I just needed the market to bite. I woke up the next morning in my own bed, groggy but fueled by a surge of adrenaline. It was officially Christmas Day. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, and my screen was absolutely flooded with notifications. 17 different inquiries had come in overnight. Apparently, pricing a pristine downtown condo competitively during the holidays was the real estate equivalent of throwing a piece of raw steak into a shark tank. I spent my entire Christmas morning sitting at my kitchen table with a notepad, ruthlessly filtering through the messages. I approached this task with the exact same brutal efficiency I used when hiring staff for the hotel. I immediately deleted anyone who asked if the deposit could be split into payments. I ignored anyone who complained about the strict background check requirements. I needed someone financially bulletproof, someone who respected contracts and valued a quiet, professional living environment. By the afternoon, I had narrowed the pool down to 3 highly qualified candidates, but one application stood out far above the rest. Her name was Daphne. She was 30 years old and worked as a senior physical therapist at a major rehabilitation hospital just 2 miles away from the condo. Her application was a masterpiece of responsibility. Her credit score was an immaculate 810 points. She had been at her job for 5 years, and her previous landlord had actually written a glowing paragraph about how meticulously she maintained her current apartment. I called Daphne that evening. Her voice over the phone was bright, articulate, and incredibly polite. She explained that her current lease was ending soon, and she was desperate to cut down her commute time. I asked her a few pointed questions about her lifestyle, and she laughed, admitting she worked long hours and mostly used her home as a quiet sanctuary to recover. As I spoke to her, I could not help but compare her to my sister. Daphne was 30, completely self-sufficient, healing people for a living, and navigating the housing market on her own merits. Chelsea was 25, contributing absolutely nothing to society, and throwing a tantrum to get free housing from a sister she actively despised. The contrast was staggering. I offered Daphne an in-person tour for the very next day. When we met at the condo, she was even better in person. She arrived exactly on time, dressed in neat business casual attire. She wiped her shoes before stepping onto the hardwood, asked highly intelligent questions about the HVAC maintenance schedule, and immediately fell in love with the natural light in the living room. She did not hesitate or try to negotiate. "This is absolutely perfect," Daphne said, looking out the window at the skyline. "I know the market is crazy right now. What do I need to do to lock this down today?" I looked at her, realizing that she was not just a tenant. In the grand chess game my parents had started, Daphne was the ultimate defensive piece. She was the impenetrable, legally protected wall I was building between my toxic family and my hard-earned property. "I have the lease agreement drafted and ready," I told her, handing over a thick folder. "If you clear the final background check tonight, the place is yours. But I need someone who can move in fast. Like this weekend." Daphne smiled brightly. "Consider it done." I drove home that night feeling a profound sense of relief. Daphne had everything I wanted in a tenant. But more importantly, her signature on that contract was going to be the weapon I used to blow my family's entitlement into a million pieces. Sunday afternoon arrived, and I met Daphne at a quiet coffee shop near the condo to finalize the paperwork. I brought 2 physical copies of the lease agreement, a blue pen, and a very serious demeanor. We sat at a corner table, and I walked her through every single clause of the contract. I am a meticulous person by nature, but this specific lease was ironclad. I made sure to heavily emphasize the building's security protocols. The property management here takes security extremely seriously, I explained to Daphne, tapping the paper. All guests must be registered, and the concierge will not allow anyone up the elevator without your explicit verbal permission. If anyone shows up claiming to be family or friends and tries to bypass the lobby, security will escort them off the premises. Do you have any issues with those rules? Daphne shook her head vigorously. Actually, I prefer it that way. Working in healthcare, privacy, and safety are huge priorities for me. I love that the building is that strict. We flipped to the final page. Daphne signed her name on the dotted line with elegant, sweeping strokes. Then, she opened her banking app on her phone and initiated a direct wire transfer to my property management account. First month's rent, last month's rent, and a full security deposit. The transaction took less than 60 seconds to clear. I watched the numbers update on my own phone screen. It was officially done. The property was legally occupied. I handed Daphne a heavy envelope containing 2 sets of keys, the electronic access fobs, and the welcome packet for the building. We shook hands warmly. She told me she had hired professional movers and would be bringing all her furniture in over the next 48 hours. After Daphne left the coffee shop, I walked back over to the condo building. I went upstairs one last time and stood in the empty living room. The afternoon sun was casting long, golden shadows across the floor. I felt a deep, anchoring sense of power. This was not a petty argument. This was a legally binding contract protected by state law. My parents could yell, they could cry, they could try to manipulate me all they wanted, but they could not argue with a signed lease and wired funds. I had completely removed their ability to control the situation. Just as I was locking the front door to leave, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw a text message from Chelsea. Hey, hope you are having a good weekend. Mom and I went shopping for some new decor for the condo. I am packing up my room now. So excited for Tuesday. Make sure you leave the keys under the mat for me. I stared at the screen. The sheer delusion of her message was almost impressive. She genuinely believed that she could just waltz into a luxury building, find keys under a non-existent doormat, and claim a life she had not earned. She had not asked what time she should arrive. She had not asked if there was any paperwork she needed to see. She just issued commands. I typed out my reply slowly, ensuring my tone was exactly as agreeable as it had been at the Christmas dinner table. Got it. See you on Tuesday. I hit send and slid the phone back into my pocket. I walked out of the building, got into my car, and drove home. I spent the rest of Sunday evening doing laundry, meal prepping for my work week, and watching a movie. I felt completely at peace. The trap was locked, the legal wall was built, and the countdown had officially started. Tuesday was coming, and it was going to be an absolute bloodbath. Thank you for listening to this story. Please click the like button to support the video, subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories, and leave a comment below telling us the name of the city you are currently living in. Every single comment helps push this video to a wider audience, and we appreciate you so much for being part of our community. Now, let's get back to the drama. Tuesday morning arrived with a bright, cloudless sky. I had deliberately requested this entire day off from the hotel weeks in advance. Normally, a Tuesday would find me rushing through the lobby in my heels, checking the occupancy reports, and dealing with a dozen minor crises before 10 in the morning. But today, I woke up naturally at 8 o'clock without an alarm. The house was completely silent. I stretched in my warm bed, feeling a profound, almost luxurious sense of calm. I knew exactly what was going to happen today, and I was entirely prepared for the fallout. I got out of bed and decided to treat myself to a slow, proper breakfast, something I rarely had the time to do. I made scrambled eggs, toasted some thick sourdough bread, and brewed a pot of premium coffee. I sat at my kitchen island, eating slowly and savoring every single bite. The world outside was busy, but inside my home, everything was under control. Around 9:30 in the morning, my phone chimed with a text message from Daphne. She had sent a photo of a large, professional moving truck backed into the loading dock of the downtown condo building. Her message read, "Movers are here. They said it should take about 3 hours to get all the big furniture up to the unit. Thank you again for making this process so incredibly smooth." I smiled, typing back a quick, polite response, telling her to let me know if she needed anything from the building superintendent. Once I hit send, I did something I had never done on a weekday in my entire adult life. I went into my phone settings, turned off all notifications, silenced the ringer completely, and placed the device inside the top drawer of my kitchen cabinet. I pushed the drawer shut with a satisfying click. I was officially off the grid. I spent the next few hours thoroughly enjoying my peace. I did a load of laundry. I watered the plants on my back porch. I took a long, hot shower. Around noon, I made myself a light salad and took a novel I had been meaning to read out to the patio. The weather was beautiful, a crisp, cool afternoon. I sat in my lounge chair, reading chapter after chapter, completely undisturbed by the outside world. I knew my family. I knew Chelsea's complete inability to wake up early or organize herself. If she had told my parents she was moving on Tuesday, it meant she would drag her feet all morning, force my mother to help her pack her endless collection of shoes, and likely not leave the suburbs until the early afternoon. I imagined the scene playing out miles away. Chelsea, wearing overpriced sunglasses, sitting in the passenger seat of her car while my mother drove her downtown. They would be listening to music, chatting about how great the new neighborhood was, completely oblivious to the massive brick wall they were about to crash into. They had never once asked me for the address, but they knew the general building because my mother had snooped on my social media when I first bought it. They would pull up to the glamorous front entrance, expecting the red carpet to be rolled out for the golden child. I turned the page of my book, feeling the gentle breeze on my face. The anticipation was not anxious, it was deeply vindicating. I had spent my entire life accommodating their demands, shrinking myself to make room for Chelsea's massive ego and swallowing my pride to keep the peace. But peace built on submission is not real peace. It is just a delayed war. And today, I was finally fighting back, not with yelling or screaming, but with cold, hard, legal boundaries. I read for another hour, losing myself in the story. When I finally closed the book, the sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky. I walked back inside the house, the hardwood floors cool against my bare feet. I walked over to the kitchen cabinet, opened the top drawer, and pulled out my phone. I tapped the screen to wake it up. The lock screen was an absolute disaster zone. I had 22 missed calls. 15 were from my mother, 5 were from my father, and 2 were from Chelsea. There were also dozens of text messages, starting with confused questions and rapidly escalating into absolute hysteria. I looked at the digital clock on the screen. It was exactly 2:15 in the afternoon. The collapse had officially happened. I took a deep breath, walked over to the kitchen counter, poured myself a glass of cold water, and pressed the callback button for my mother. The phone rang exactly 1/2 of a second before Evelyn picked it up. She must have been clutching the device in a panic. When she spoke, her voice was a full octave higher than normal, shaking with a mixture of terror and outrage. "Madeline, where have you been? I have been calling you for 2 hours." My mother was practically screaming into the receiver. The background noise was chaotic. I could hear the distinct sound of city traffic, buses pulling away, and someone sobbing loudly. "I took the day off," I replied, my voice completely steady and even. "I was reading a book in my backyard." "What is the emergency?" "The emergency?" Evelyn shrieked, entirely losing her composure. "The emergency is that there are strangers in your apartment." We pulled up to the building, and the security guard would not let us into the lobby. He told us Chelsea was not on the approved guest list. And then, When we finally convinced him to call up to the unit, some woman answered and said she lives there. There is a massive truck outside unloading couches into your condo. You need to call the police right now. Someone has broken in and stolen your property. I took a slow sip of my water, letting her hyperventilate for a moment. No one broke in, Mom. The police are not necessary. The woman upstairs is named Daphne. She is a physical therapist, and she is my new tenant. I rented the condo out. She signed the lease on Sunday. There was a dead, heavy silence on the other end of the line. The background traffic noise seemed to amplify in the quiet. Your tenant, Evelyn repeated, her voice dropping into a breathless whisper of disbelief. Yes, I said calmly. It is an investment property. The entire point of buying it was to generate rental income. Daphne passed a rigorous background check, paid her deposit, and legally occupies the space now. But you knew Chelsea was moving in today. Evelyn stammered, the reality slowly starting to crack through her delusion. In the background, I heard Chelsea's voice cut through the noise, wailing in a high-pitched, theatrical cry. Actually, I did not know that until you announced it at the Christmas dinner table. I corrected her, keeping my tone perfectly conversational, as if we were discussing the weather. You and Dad decided, completely on your own, that Chelsea would live in my property without ever consulting me. You did not ask. You demanded. You informed me of a decision you made about an asset I purchased with my own money. I simply chose to ignore your demand and proceed with my original financial plan. Madeline, this is unacceptable, my mother exploded, her panic turning into vicious anger. Chelsea has all her suitcases on the sidewalk. People are staring at us. She told all her friends she was moving downtown today. You have completely humiliated her. How could you be so incredibly selfish? You have a whole house to yourself. You do not need that condo right now. It is not a question of need, I said, leaning against the kitchen counter. It is a question of ownership and respect. You enabled her to believe she can just take whatever she wants without earning it. You expected me to hand over the keys to a luxury apartment so she could live there for free while I pay the mortgage, the property taxes, and the maintenance fees. That is not family helping family. That is financial abuse. She is your sister. Evelyn cried out, using the exact same line she had used for 25 years to excuse every single terrible thing Chelsea had ever done. And I am your daughter, I replied smoothly, feeling no guilt whatsoever. But that did not stop you from trying to exploit me. I am sorry that you and Chelsea are embarrassed on the sidewalk. Truly I am. But I have a legally binding contract with Daphne. She paid 3 months of rent up front. There is absolutely nothing I can do. You need to pack the car and take Chelsea back home. I could hear Evelyn sputtering, completely unable to form a coherent argument against cold, hard facts. She was so used to manipulating me with emotional guilt trips that she had no idea how to combat logic. But before she could try another angle, I heard a scuffle on her end of the line. The phone was being wrestled away. A moment later, a much deeper, much angrier voice boomed through the speaker. My father had taken the phone. Madeline, you listen to me right now, Harrison ordered. His voice was strict, carrying that heavy, authoritarian tone he used whenever he wanted to shut down an argument instantly. It was the voice that used to terrify me when I was a child. But right now, standing in my own kitchen, looking at the house I bought myself, his voice just sounded hollow. I am listening, Dad, I said. You are going to fix this immediately, he demanded. You are going to call that building manager, you are going to terminate that lease, and you are going to get those people out of that apartment. I do not care what it costs. I will pay the penalty fee if I have to. But your sister is moving into that condo today. I actually let out a short, genuine laugh. You cannot be serious. You want me to illegally evict a paying tenant on her move-in day? That is not how the real world works. Contracts are not suggestions. If I break that lease, Daphne could sue me, and she would win easily. I am not ruining my credit and facing legal action to accommodate a temper tantrum. This is not a temper tantrum. This is about family loyalty. Harrison yelled. After everything we have done for you, everything we sacrificed to raise you, this is how you repay us? By leaving your sister stranded on the street like a stray dog. Everything you did for me? I asked, my voice finally dropping its polite customer service mask and turning ice cold. You provided the basic legal requirements of a parent until I was 18. Since the day I moved out, you have not contributed a single dime to my life. I paid for my own college. I bought my own cars. I saved for my own down payments. You never checked on my finances because you knew I would survive. Do not talk to me about sacrifice. Harrison breathed heavily into the phone. You are being completely unreasonable. No, I am being observant, I fired back. Let us talk about what this is really about. This is not about Chelsea needing a fresh start in the city. This is about your retirement fund. The silence on the line was absolute. I knew I had hit the exact nerve I was aiming for. I know exactly how much money Chelsea has drained from you, I continued, speaking slowly and deliberately. I know you paid off her $15,000 credit card debt last year. I know you had to dip into your 401k to do it. You are terrified that you are never going to be able to retire because she is bleeding you dry. So, you and Mom came up with a brilliant plan. You decided to dump your financial liability onto me. You figured if she lived in my condo for free, it would relieve the pressure on your bank accounts. You wanted me to subsidize her lifestyle so you could save yourselves. That is a lie, Harrison said, but his voice lacked the booming confidence from a minute ago. It sounded thin and defensive. It is the truth, and you know it, I said firmly. You can keep funding her life until you are bankrupt, but you are not going to use my assets as a bailout. My condo is a business. It is off limits. If Chelsea wants to live downtown, she can get a full-time job, build her credit, and sign a lease like an adult. You are cold, my father said, his voice dripping with disgust and profound disappointment. I do not even know who you are anymore. You are a massive disappointment to this family. 10 years ago, hearing my father call me a disappointment would have crushed me. I would have cried for days. But today, it felt like shedding a heavy, suffocating coat I had been wearing for too long. I can live with that, I said quietly. Have a safe drive back to the suburbs. I took the phone away from my ear and pressed the red end call button. I did not block their numbers. I did not turn my phone off. I just left it on the counter and walked into my living room. The afternoon sun was casting a beautiful golden light across my furniture. I walked over to the wine rack, pulled out a very nice bottle of Pinot Noir I had been saving, and poured myself a generous glass. I walked out to the back porch and watched the sunset. I thought severing the tie would hurt. I thought I would cry. But as I watched the sky turn purple, I realized the war was not over. Narcissists never surrender easily. They were just retreating to regroup. The real smear campaign was about to begin. When I woke up the next morning, the digital silence from my family was deafening. Out of curiosity, I opened my social media applications while drinking my morning coffee. I immediately noticed that Evelyn, Harrison, and Chelsea had completely blocked me across every single platform. I could not see their pictures, their updates, or their profiles. It was a classic manipulative tactic, the silent treatment, designed to make me panic and beg for their attention. Instead, I just smiled, closed the application, and went to work feeling lighter than I had in years. For the first few days, my life at the hotel was spectacular. The holiday rush was in full swing, and I was exactly where I thrived, managing staff, solving complex logistical problems, and keeping the luxury machine running smoothly. I felt completely detached from the drama. But toxic families do not just give up, they send emissaries. On Friday evening, as I was driving home from work, my phone rang. It was Aunt Beatrice, my mother's older sister. Beatrice was the family peacemaker, which is just a polite way of saying she was a flying monkey. Her entire role in the family dynamic was to sweep bad behavior under the rug so that holidays would not be awkward. Madeline, sweetheart, Beatrice said, her voice dripping with artificial concern. Your mother called me crying yesterday. She told me what happened with the apartment. I have to say, I am quite shocked. This is tearing your parents apart. Aunt Beatrice, I replied, keeping my eyes on the road. I rented my legally owned property to a paying tenant. I did not commit a crime. My parents are upset because I refused to let them give my property away for free. I know, you have worked very hard, Beatrice said, using the classic dismissal technique. But Madeline, family is forever. Sometimes you have to make sacrifices to keep the peace. Chelsea is very fragile right now. Do you not think you could have just been the bigger person and compromised? You are the successful one. You should be helping them. Compromise requires a conversation, Beatrice. They did not ask me. They demanded, I explained patiently, though I knew she would not truly listen. And keeping the peace just means I have to suffer so they do not have to feel uncomfortable. I am done doing that. Tell my mother she needs to stop calling people to fight her battles. I hung up the phone before Beatrice could launch into another guilt trip. I thought that would be the end of it for a while. I severely underestimated Chelsea's absolute lack of boundaries. 2 days later, on a busy Sunday afternoon, I was standing in the grand marble lobby of the hotel, speaking with the head concierge. The lobby was packed with wealthy guests checking in. Suddenly, the heavy glass revolving doors spun aggressively, and Chelsea marched inside. She looked completely out of place, wearing dirty sweatpants and an oversized hoodie, her face red and blotchy from crying. She spotted me immediately and stomped straight across the marble floor. You ruined my life, she screamed, not caring that dozens of heads turned to look at her. All my friends are laughing at me. I had to unpack my bags back into my old room. You are an evil, jealous person. My heart spiked, but my face remained an absolute mask of professional indifference. I did not engage. I did not yell back. I did not try to explain myself. I knew exactly how to handle a disruptive presence in my lobby. I gave a subtle, practiced nod to the 2 massive security guards stationed near the entrance. Within 10 seconds, before Chelsea could even finish her next sentence, both guards flanked her. Ma'am, you need to lower your voice or leave the premises, one of them said firmly. Chelsea whipped around, furious. Do not touch me. I am her sister. I have never seen this woman before in my life, I said smoothly to the guards, my voice projecting just enough for the surrounding guests to hear. Please escort her off the property. She is disturbing the guests. Chelsea's jaw dropped in absolute shock. The security guards did not hesitate. They grabbed her by the arms and swiftly marched her out through the revolving doors while she shrieked in humiliation. I straightened my blazer, turned back to the concierge, and continued our conversation as if a fly had just been swatted away. Chelsea had embarrassed herself in public. But I knew my parents were about to take the embarrassment to a global level. When I arrived home from work the following Tuesday, I noticed a thick, cream-colored envelope taped directly to the center of my front door. It had my full legal name written on the front in my mother's meticulous, cursive handwriting. There was no stamp. Someone had driven all the way to my house just to tape it there. I unlocked the door, went inside, and tossed my keys on the counter. I opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a single, heavy sheet of stationery. It was a formal letter, co-signed by both Evelyn and Harrison. It read like a legal document drafted by incredibly bitter people. Madeline, your recent actions have caused irreparable damage to this family. You have humiliated your sister, disrespected your parents, and shown a complete lack of basic human decency. We raised you to be a generous, loving person, but it is clear you only care about money. We are giving you one final opportunity to make this right. You have exactly 1 week to evict your current tenant, hand the keys over to Chelsea, and formally apologize to us in person. If you choose your arrogance over your blood, we will have no choice but to cut all ties. You will be completely removed from our will, and you will no longer be welcome in our home or at any family gatherings. The choice is yours. I stood in my kitchen, reading the letter 3 separate times. I felt a strange mixture of disgust and absolute clarity. They genuinely believed that threatening to cut me out of their will was a massive leverage play. They thought that the promise of some future inheritance, an inheritance I already knew was being rapidly depleted by Chelsea's failures, would bring me crawling back to my knees. They were using money as a leash, completely failing to realize that I had chewed through that leash a decade ago. I did not feel sad. I did not feel the urge to draft a desperate reply defending my actions. Instead, I walked over to the kitchen drawer where I kept my matches. I grabbed the letter and the envelope and walked out the back door to my patio. I have a small, cast-iron fire pit sitting on the concrete. I threw the letter inside, struck a match, and dropped it onto the thick paper. I stood there in the cool evening air, watching the flames catch the corner of the page. The fire quickly consumed my mother's careful handwriting, turning the ultimatums and the threats into black, curling ash. It took less than a minute for the entire thing to disappear. I did not call them. I did not text them. I let my absolute silence be my answer. Later that evening, my phone buzzed with an incoming text from an unknown number. I opened it. It was obviously Chelsea, using a friend's phone to bypass my block. Mom and Dad are writing you out of the will. You are going to get absolutely nothing when they die, and I am going to get the house and the accounts. I hope your stupid condo was worth throwing away your entire family. Have a nice life alone. I stared at the bitter, venomous words. The absolute tragedy of her mindset was staggering. She was 25 years old, banking her entire future on the death of our parents, waiting around to inherit a suburban house while contributing absolutely nothing to the world. I blocked the new number without replying. I decided I was not going to sit in my house and absorb their negative energy. I went upstairs, took a shower, and dressed in a beautiful outfit. I drove myself to my favorite, high-end Italian restaurant downtown, a place my parents always said was too expensive. I sat at a quiet corner table, ordered a massive plate of truffle pasta, and drank a glass of incredibly expensive wine. I toasted to myself, to my freedom, and to the boundary I had successfully defended. The one-week deadline my parents had set passed without a single word from me. The silence from their end was deafening. I thought that maybe, just maybe, they had finally realized they had lost the war and decided to leave me alone. But narcissists do not handle rejection well. They let the silence do. Months passed. Winter turned into spring, and spring faded into a hot Texas summer. And then, when I least expected it, the true public humiliation began. By the time October rolled around, 10 full months had passed since the explosive Christmas dinner. My life was going incredibly well. Daphne was the perfect tenant, paying rent exactly on time every single month. I had started dating a wonderful man named Logan, an architect who appreciated my independence and completely supported my decision to distance myself from my toxic relatives. I had moved on. One Saturday afternoon, I was walking through a high-end outdoor shopping mall, carrying a coffee, when I accidentally bumped into someone coming out of a boutique. I looked up and froze. It was Chelsea. It was the first time I had seen her since the hotel lobby incident. She looked terrible. There were dark, heavy bags under her eyes, and her posture was slumped. The expensive clothes she was wearing looked wrinkled and unkempt. When she recognized me, she flinched, pulling her shopping bags close to her chest. "Madeline," she muttered, looking away quickly. "Chelsea," I replied calmly. "How are things?" She sneered, a weak imitation of her old arrogance. "Fine. Everything is fine. Mom and Dad are perfectly happy without you around." "I am glad to hear that," I said sincerely. I did not want to argue. I just wanted to buy my shoes and go home. But Chelsea could not help herself. "You know, you really messed up my timeline," she hissed. "I was supposed to be living downtown. Now I am stuck in the suburbs, and I had to take a stupid part-time job at a coffee shop just to get Mom off my back. Are you happy now?" "I am extremely happy," I said, looking her dead in the eyes. "And, honestly, working at a coffee shop is the best thing that could happen to you. It builds character." She glared at me with pure hatred, spun around, and marched away. I watched her go, feeling a brief pang of pity before shrugging it off. I went home and forgot about the encounter entirely. 2 days later, my phone rang while I was sitting on my couch with Logan. It was Hazel, my older cousin on my father's side. Hazel and I had always been friendly, though we rarely spoke outside of family reunions. "Madeline, have you checked Facebook today?" Hazel asked, her voice tight with anxiety. "No," I replied, sitting up straight. "You know my parents blocked me months ago. What is going on?" "Evelyn posted a massive update," Hazel said, sounding deeply uncomfortable. "She did not use your name, but she made it incredibly obvious she is talking about you." It is really, really bad, Madeline. I took screenshots and sent them to your phone. You need to look at them. I put Hazel on speaker and opened my messages. Hazel had sent 5 long screenshots. It was a massive, dramatic essay written by my mother. It was a masterclass in manipulation and victimhood. The post read, "It breaks a mother's heart to realize that the child she sacrificed everything for has turned into a cold, greedy monster. We gave our oldest daughter everything. We funded her life, we cheered her on, and we loved her unconditionally. But when her younger sister needed a safe place to stay during a difficult transition, she slammed the door in her face simply because she wanted to make a few extra dollars. She chose a real estate investment over her own blood. We have not seen her in 10 months. She threw her family away for money. Please pray for our broken hearts." I felt a cold fire ignite in my chest. I scrolled down to the comments section. It was an absolute bloodbath. Aunts, uncles, old family friends, and complete strangers were leaving hundreds of hateful comments. People were calling me an ungrateful brat, a sociopath, and a terrible sister. Some people were suggesting my parents sue me for the money they spent raising me. "Are you still there?" Hazel asked nervously through the speaker. A lot of the family is taking her side because they do not know the real story. They think you literally kicked Chelsea out onto the street. Logan was reading the screenshots over my shoulder. He looked at me, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Are you going to let her get away with this?" he asked quietly. I stared at the horrible comments. I had stayed silent for months. I had taken the high road. I had allowed them to walk away with their pride. But reading those lies, seeing my mother weaponize our extended family against me, the cold fire inside me solidified into pure, calculating resolve. She wanted to play the victim in the court of public opinion. Fine. But I was about to bring the receipts. I did not cry. I did not panic. I simply walked over to my home office, turned on my computer, and opened a blank text document. Hazel stayed on the phone with me, offering to help corroborate dates and events. "I am not going to write an emotional rant," I told Hazel, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Emotion can be twisted. Facts cannot. I am going to write a timeline. I spent the next 3 hours drafting the most meticulous, bulletproof statement of my life. I did not call my mother crazy, and I did not call Chelsea lazy. I simply laid out the objective history of the last 10 years. I started by explaining that I moved out at 19 and fully funded my own college education and living expenses without a single dollar of parental support. I documented how I saved for my first house and then how I legally purchased the downtown condo strictly as an investment property. Then, I addressed the Christmas dinner. I wrote out the exact sequence of events, how I was never asked, only informed that my sister would be moving into my new property for free. I explained that I had already signed a legal, binding lease with a fully vetted tenant before my sister even packed her bags. I detailed the financial reality of the situation, explaining that allowing someone to live in a luxury condo rent-free while I paid the massive mortgage, taxes, and homeowner association fees was not a favor, it was financial suicide. Finally, I addressed the most damaging part of my mother's post. My parents claim they sacrificed everything for me. The truth is, my father recently spent $15,000 bailing my sister out of credit card debt from a failed business, directly draining his own retirement fund to do so. Their demand for my condo was an attempt to shift the financial burden of my sister's lifestyle onto my shoulders. I refused to be their bailout plan. I chose financial independence and healthy boundaries over toxic manipulation. I will not apologize for protecting my hard work. I proofread the text 5 times, ensuring the tone was calm, professional, and devastatingly factual. Then I posted it publicly on my own page and tagged Hazel, Aunt Beatrice, and several other vocal family members who had commented on my mother's post. The response was immediate and explosive. Within 2 hours, my post was being shared rapidly through the extended family network. The dynamic shifted violently. Aunts and uncles who had just spent the morning calling me a monster were suddenly deleting their comments on my mother's page. The undeniable facts regarding the $15,000 credit card bailout and the reality of the signed lease completely shattered Evelyn's victim narrative. Hazel commented publicly, confirming my timeline and calling out the blatant favoritism she had witnessed for years. By the time the sun went down, the tide had completely turned. Family members who had previously judged me began sending private messages, apologizing for jumping to conclusions and expressing their horror at how my parents had tried to extort my property. Faced with absolute, public humiliation and the sudden backlash from her own siblings, Evelyn panicked. She completely deleted her massive, dramatic post, trying to scrub the evidence of her lies from the internet. But it was too late. The truth was out there, and it could not be unread. It shattered my parents' illusion of the perfect family forever. The very next morning, my phone rang. It was Harrison. I let it ring 4 times before answering. "Madeline," my father said, his voice completely drained of its usual booming authority. He sounded old, tired, and defeated. "Please take the post down. You're embarrassing your mother. People are calling us and asking terrible questions." "You embarrassed yourselves," I replied, feeling absolutely no sympathy. "Mom tried to publicly destroy my reputation with a fabricated story. I simply provided the necessary context. I am not taking it down." "We are sorry," Harrison mumbled, the words sounding like sandpaper in his throat. "We pushed too hard. We were just worried about Chelsea. Please, if you take it down, we can try to sit down and talk about this like a family." "No," I said firmly. "There is nothing left to talk about. The post stays up. You made your bed, and now you have to lie in it. Do not contact me again." I hung up the phone. I kept the post up. I drew my final line in the sand, knowing that I would rather be the villain in their delusional story than the victim in their reality. And surprisingly, the universe rewarded me. The aftermath of the social media war was quiet, but it was incredibly profound. My parents never attempted to publicly shame me again. About a month later, I received a short, handwritten letter in the mail from Evelyn. It did not contain any ultimatums or threats of disinheritance. It was a stiff, uncomfortable letter accepting my boundaries. She stated that they would respect my distance, and she finally admitted, in writing, that they had relied too heavily on my independence while neglecting to discipline Chelsea. I folded the letter, put it in a file cabinet, and never replied. It was not a perfect reconciliation, but it was the closure I needed. We settled into a state of extremely low contact, exchanging brief, polite texts on major holidays, and absolutely nothing more. The forced reality check I delivered actually had a ripple effect. Without my condo to act as a free playground, and with the extended family now acutely aware of her grifting, Chelsea finally ran out of options. Harrison, humiliated by the public exposure of his drained retirement funds, finally cut off her endless supply of cash. Forced to face the real world, Chelsea had to abandon her dreams of living a luxury lifestyle downtown. She secured a full-time job working as a receptionist at a local dental office. From what Hazel told me, she hated every second of it, complained constantly about having to wake up early, and was barely making enough to cover her own car insurance. It was a harsh, grueling lesson in adulthood, one she should have learned 10 years prior. As for me, my life continued an upward trajectory that I could never have imagined when I was that exhausted 19-year-old girl eating instant noodles. Daphne, my wonderful tenant, renewed her lease for a second year, providing me with a steady, reliable stream of passive income. At the hotel, my ability to handle high-pressure situations and difficult people caught the attention of the regional director. I was offered a massive promotion to the position of general manager at a brand new luxury resort opening across the city. The promotion came with a significant salary increase and total creative control over the property's operations. In my personal life, Logan and I grew closer. After a year of dating, he officially moved into my house in the suburbs. Our home is peaceful, filled with mutual respect, laughter, and zero manipulative drama. We host dinners for our friends, we travel, and we support each other's careers without keeping a scorecard. Looking back on that fateful Christmas dinner, I realized that it was the greatest gift my family ever unknowingly gave me. For years, I had allowed them to treat me like an invisible workhorse, a safety net they could deploy whenever their golden child stumbled. By making such an incredibly arrogant, outrageous demand for my property, they forced me to finally snap the remaining threads of obligation that tied me to their dysfunction. Sometimes, people think that walking away from your family is an act of cruelty or selfishness. They think that blood automatically entitles people to your time, your money, and your sanity. But I learned the hard way that protecting your peace is the highest form of self-respect. The ultimate revenge against toxic people is not screaming at them, fighting with them, or trying to ruin their lives. The ultimate revenge is simply locking the door, building your own empire, and living a beautiful, successful life entirely out of their reach. They wanted to take my condo. Instead, they gave me my freedom. Am I the jerk for renting out my own condo and leaving my entitled sister crying on the sidewalk, or was it the harsh reality check my family desperately needed? Did I take it too far by bringing hotel security and the public truth into it? Let me know whose side you are on in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that button and ring the bell so you never miss another story. See you in the next one.